Hi, my name is Elizabeth Talburt, and this is my self-reflection and assessment on Speech 219. So in terms of public speaking, I feel pretty comfortable when I give a presentation. Before this class, I felt more comfortable giving speeches in person, just because I was able to see audience feedback, maybe look into the crowd and see a familiar face, or see someone that looked like they were enjoying my presentation, and I kind of fed off of that. So originally, when I was doing public speaking exercises that were virtual and posting them to a class where I didn't really know anybody, I was a little bit nervous, and I think that showed in some of my first videos that I made. However, we had a lot of discussions and a lot of video assignments, and as the course went on, I became more comfortable doing this sort of 21st century public speaking that was all virtual. In terms of my preparation process, I like to create my speech outline and my slides before I start thinking about what exactly I want to say. So I'll have an idea or a general concept in my head about what I want the speech to be about. And I usually start with the slides first because that helps me kind of visualize what I'm going to be saying and how the presentation is actually going to flow together. After I get the slides down, then I start prepping on what exactly I want to say in more of an in-depth level. But I try not to outline my speeches too much because if I become too focused on saying everything that I had written out verbatim, then I found that I make more mistakes in my speeches. So it's kind of funny because when I have a little bit less preparation, I feel like I do better on my speeches. In terms of in-person versus virtual presentations, after this class, I feel like I'm comfortable with both. As I said earlier, I was initially more comfortable with doing speeches in person, but now I feel like after having this practice where we were doing speeches to essentially strangers and having that virtual atmosphere, I feel like I'm prepared to do these sort of virtual or webcast presentations in the future. The reason why being comfortable with both is really important is because today's technology allows a lot of people to telecommute or work remotely. So odds are at least some point in your career, you're probably going to encounter a situation where you need to do a speech and not everybody that is in attendance will be there in person, or maybe you're the one who is telecommuting or presenting their speech remotely. Back in January, before I took this class, I actually did a virtual presentation to my mentor and a NASA principal scientist on research that I'd done over the summer. I'd never really done a presentation in this manner before, so I kind of didn't know what to expect, and I think I was nervous when giving this presentation. Luckily, it was virtual, and it was just the slides that I had presented and my voice narrating the slides, but I think if there would have been some sort of video feed where you would have seen me, I would have looked really nervous because I hadn't had any experience with it. In terms of presentation preparation, I found the presentation ecosystem to be a really helpful diagram. It breaks up the speech presentation preparation process into 3 different iterative sort of steps. First is to focus on the message, then the visual story, and then the delivery. If you look at the diagram at the end of each section, there's a critique section where you go over what you have and find any gaps and fill those gaps. I kind of follow this design when I'm preparing for a presentation. First, I develop the message, not too in-depth, and then I go into the visual story, and my message is kind of crafted while I'm making the visual story. So I think about how I want the presentation to flow, which is kind of motion and design. I find a theme that I like and that I want to stick to, which is the graphic design element. And visual thinking, to me, it helps me put together the flow of the message and what exactly I want to say and where. So if I have it lined up in slides or in a visual aid in the order that I want it to be in, then I can visualize what the message will be and what I want to include in that message. And at the end of that process, I do the critique step where I look at my presentation, maybe practice it a couple times, and think about where I can improve on the visual story and where I could add more detail to create a better or a well-rounded presentation. In terms of creating the message, this step has to do with considering the audience, brainstorming ideas, writing or outlining the speech presentation, and critiquing what you have. So it's very important to consider the audience when discussing a topic that's particularly specialized. So if you're presenting a highly technical presentation, you should definitely consider the audience because there might be people who are from different professional backgrounds. And if you're giving a speech to them, it should be digestible for everybody in the room. In terms of the visual story, I kind of explained that earlier. I like to think of a visual story as how you lay out what you want to say in sort of a graphical sense. And tying it all together is the delivery, so that's putting the visual story and the message together and practicing the delivery. So this ties together the human aspect, the web or devices that you're using, or any paper props that you're using, and practicing them together and then critiquing what you have to fill in any gaps again. The three most important takeaways that I got from this class were to tell a story in a presentation, consider the audience, and not to neglect your visual aids. I think my favorite lesson of this class was to tell a story when you're making a presentation, because a lot of the really good speeches and presentations that I've seen, especially TED Talks, somehow incorporated a story. So it could be about technology or about life experiences. That one's easier to tie in a story, but there are a lot of really good speeches that centered around technology that also told a story, which I wasn't really expecting at first. But after having some experience with it in this class, I think that's a very valuable lesson in creating an engaging presentation.